Okay, so these crazy news dropped quite a while ago, and it's not like I haven't noticed it. I actually have this bad habit that I always check my phone right before bed, and this news was posted in Swedish time right before I was supposed to go to bed, and it was really hard to fall asleep that night, especially the way the news was presented. It looked like the account was hacked or something, but then half an hour later, Flea reposted it, and we got more and more evidence as time passed. So like I said, really hard to sleep that night and put my phone down. So yeah, that's that. And yeah, all this is really crazy, and it's really hard for me to take it in, but I mean, it seems pretty legit at this point. Flea and Chad has reposted it, and Flea has confirmed on Twitter, and Josh fan page has apparently been in contact with Josh and confirmed it, and their Spotify page is updated there with their classic logo instead of a picture of the band members. And I guess I just have to let this actually sink in, but it's still really hard. So moving on from this crazy fact, why do I even make a video about it at this point? I mean, everyone has already addressed it. Well, I noticed this kind of interesting ripple effect that my views has gone up right after this news dropped, so it would be weird to not address these news. And I also thought I would go more into depth about it than just stating the obvious that I had just have done and how crazy it is. I actually have prepared an agenda here, so what I will talk about is like a breakdown of what he has been up to these past 10 years, because it's kind of funny. The official announcement of his reunion was exactly 10 years after he left the band, so quite literally this last decade, what has he been up to? That is what I'm going to go through, and then I'm going to analyze what has been said in interviews, and then I will just state some expectations, like what do we do from here? So yeah, so breaking down John's decade, I kind of want to have my own personal twist to it, so you kind of understand why it's important for someone like me what just has happened as well. So I picked up the guitar in about 2008, I believe, played it every now and then. I have heard about the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but I didn't really follow them that intensely at that point. And then I think in about 2011 I started to listen a lot to John's solo work, so ever since 2011 I have been following his work with great enthusiasm. So the first release that he did, which I was really excited about, was in 2012, the Letter Leffer EP, which he started his electronic experimentation with, and that was really cool. And later that year he also released the full album, the PBX album. And I am the Spotify generation, so I never buy CDs. I barely have a CD player, but I actually bought the CD, the PBX CD, so I mean, that says a lot if you know my history of buying CDs, which I guess is quite sad. But yeah, moving on. In 2013 he released the Wayne tribute, the 10-minute guitar solo, which was a tribute, or it is a tribute to Wayne Foreman, which was a good friend of John, who sadly passed away at that time. So I was really excited about that release. It was the first guitar-based release that John did since I started to follow his work, and I actually tried to make a tab for the whole thing, and also a 10-part video series lesson, which is up on my old channel, which I don't really use anymore. But I guess it just goes to show that I was really enthusiastic and happy about that guitar solo that he released then. And then the same year he released Outside's EP, which was quite experimental. I know, I listen to it a lot. Quite cool, but sometimes maybe too weird for me. But generally quite a cool EP. And then in 2014 he released Enclosure, and I think that album is really, really cool, because I think he really managed to merge his guitar and singing with his newly developed skills in electronic music. So I think that album is really, really good. It just takes you to a very unique place that many albums really can't do, so I think I really appreciate that album. And yeah, he also worked a lot with the Black Knights, the rap group, and in 2015 an album was released with the song called Reptables, and in the middle of that song you get a really unexpected part where John just sings and plays guitar in the middle of the song. So and all I can say is that that was on a loop for me that year for quite a while, because it was really rare at that point to have a new Frusciante song where he just sings and plays guitar. And then later that year he released his Trick Finger album, the first one, and that one has no guitar and vocals, so I believe that is why he used another artist name, because it's very, very different. I mean, if you think Letter Leffer and stuff like that is different from his usual stuff, I guess this is even more different. And then later that year he did this huge SoundCloud release, which got me really, really excited. So it featured a lot of different work that he has done. So for example, it featured the Rhinos tracks that was recorded between 2009 and 2011, and I think those are really, really cool. He plays around with a lot of electronic music and also has guitar, and yeah, I think those tracks are really good. And he also had this 4-track guitar music, which some of the tracks remind you of like the 19 stuff he made in Neanderlades and things like that. And one song there is like really cool that I have had on repeat for a long time as well. And he also had some additional single tracks, like a guitar version of his Enclosure song, and I think it was an Enclosure song, and some covers and things like that. And later on he posted a lot of Black Knight's instrumentals on that page as well. So, and then in 2016 he released a 4-Grow EP, which is also very electronic, but it also has some guitar and stuff like that in it. And then in 2017 he released his second Trick Finger album. So that is pretty much what he has been up to when it comes to releasing music. And I should also say that during this time Red Hot Chili Peppers released I'm With You in 2011, and me personally, I hadn't started to follow the Red Hot Chili Peppers that enthusiastically at that point, so I noticed that album after it was released, and therefore it didn't have that huge impact on me like the Getaway album had in 2016. I really looked forward to that, and I got really excited when that was released, and I have listened to it a lot, and I have practiced a lot of the guitar riffs and all that, so I really enjoyed the Getaway album. I just want to say that. So now let's move on with the analyzation of this. So I thought we would do this analyzation by seeing what John and Joss has been saying in interviews in the last decade. And starting with John, first I think we need to take a look at his general attitude in life in order to get a better understanding of where he's coming from. So, most people seem to care about, success and approval and fame and things like that, quite common. But for the case of John, he really seems to value music and creativity about anything else. And, fame really means nothing to him, and money and things like that, materialistic things. And I think that is really important to understand when we read this interview, which is from 2013, a Billboard interview. So the first quote I think really confirms what I just said, and the quote is, quote, "When you get in a band, especially a band that's popular, you don't even realize that you're doing it because it's so natural to do, but you basically stick to proven formulas and things that have proven themselves able to sell to people, and by doing that, very little growth takes place over a period of years." End quote. And then one day, Flea suggests that they should take a 2-year break, which John also talks about in this interview, and I'm going to quote that now as well. So, quote, "And by about 4 months later, after the break started, I was so excited about quitting the band, I didn't even want it to be a 2-year thing anymore. I just knew that I didn't ever want to be in the band again, end quote. So, now that he has joined the band again, that seems kind of weird. Did he lie, or what's up with that? But I actually think it's 100% true at that moment in time what he was saying. John really keeps his integrity towards music, and I think the problem is that there has been an imbalance, so he hasn't been able to keep up that integrity. And when I say imbalance, I kind of think imbalance between internal and external. Internal when you just explore music for fun by yourself and don't really have all that pressure that you need to meet expectations, and just that childlike excitement for exploring things. That's kind of what I mean with the internal. And then the external is when you share it with other people, live performances and things like that. And I think there has been an imbalance between that internal and that external that I just described. And in order to fix this imbalance, he really needed to quit the band in order to be able to focus more internally again, because when he was in the band he always had to meet all these expectations and traveling and things like that. So I really think that is the cause. And we have another interesting question and response in this interview, which is about live performances. And I'm going to read his whole answer because I think it sums things up pretty nicely. So here we go. Quote, question: would you consider performing your new music even for a small crowd? And the answer is no, I have no interest in playing live. I really don't think of myself as a performer anymore. It was never something that came naturally to me. It was something that I adapted to, but it was never really an expression of who I was. I'm not a performer. I don't appreciate the effect the audiences have on me, because for me, music is something that comes from inside of me, and music is something that I immerse myself in. And when I'm in front of an audience, I can't ignore my surroundings and I can't ignore the way they make me feel. They make me feel good, the audiences. But then I find that I'm not so much reaching inside myself to create something, but I'm more trying to meet with their expectations. And I'm trying to do something that's entertaining to them. And that's just not me. I'm not interested in meeting people's expectations, and I'm not interested in pleasing people. I'm glad I did it successfully for so long, but when it comes down to it, I probably have a lot more in common with old classical composers from the 18th century that I do with the rock stars of today, you know. I think more in terms of creating a full composition, and that's really what makes me happy to be alive and excited to live every day, is the ability to create from scratch an entire piece of music. I'm more comfortable doing that than I ever was doing anything. It makes me happier than playing the guitar did, and so entertaining people. I just don't think it's my bag, you know." End quote. So here I think we see really clearly that he had too much focus on the external for too long of a time, you know, meeting expectations with the crowd and all that stuff, and he didn't really have time to develop his excitement for music and creation and all that stuff. And by the way, we have another example where I think he had a better balance between the internal and external, and that is a live solo performance from 2005. And here I think he really states the importance in a very sincere way of performing for crowds.
I released, as you know, I released all that music last year, but I didn't play it for any audiences, and I'm never going to do that again. If I put out some music, I'm going to play it for people, because you're half the music. You're half the music. It's not just a saying. It's like, I never felt like that music. It just didn't feel complete till I was playing it for you guys, you know? It makes me feel so good to connect this music with people, you know?
So moving on with Josh's attitude, we have a very interesting interview from 2016 from the from the German guitar magazine Guitar and Bass, but in German obviously. And in there he mentions some problem with the band, and to sum it up, he basically says that the recording process is complex and exhausting. And I think he said that the producer had too much of a say, but he wanted it to be more of a band thing, you know, that they all just jam together until they find that magic, and then just go with that and trust that. But now it was more like that the producer controls too much, and maybe the band records an instrumental, then Kiedis comes in when the band has left many hours later and started working on a vocal track, and he just didn't really like that process, and I can really understand that myself as well. That's one thing that's quite interesting with this regard, but we get an even more interesting question in this interview, and that is, quote, "Can you imagine making such a radical decision like John did and leave the band for a solo album someday?" And Josh says, "No idea. I guess he had some more reasons for quitting the band than doing less tours to get more time for his own music. Therefore, personally, I think that I wouldn't make such a decision anytime soon, particularly since I love playing with the band and I hope for more new rudiments and ways to create something special." So now it's time for my analysis of these interviews. So starting with John, I think it kind of both makes sense and does not make sense at the same time. It makes sense that he wanted to do something else now, having a decade of just exploring electronic music for his own sake and not really thinking too much about performing or the audience and things like that. I mean, if you speak in metaphors, you can say that he has had a decade to grow his roots and now it makes sense to continue to grow the tree. So, you know, just the same way as being in the band gets old and stagnates growth, making electronic music by yourself also gets old and stagnates growth. You always need to switch things up every now and then in order to grow. So it makes sense that he stopped making electronic music for himself full time like this. But what was unexpected was that the new thing would be to rejoin the band. And another thing that's weird about him joining the band, I mean, there are many tiny things that is weird about him joining the band again, and one of them is that his Marshall Major amp apparently was sold like 9 months ago. That's quite recently. Assuming it's not fake and I'm not making a fool out of myself right now, but I mean, things like that just doesn't make any sense. Or maybe he won't even play guitar in the band, who knows. He had an interview in August 2019 at the Johnny Ramone tribute, and there he says that he is working on new stuff that isn't ready to be talked about. So, I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean the band? But at the same time, he says that it's electronic, and what does that mean? Is this solo stuff, or are the Red Hot Chili Peppers doing electronic stuff now? So, yeah, it raises a lot of questions. But I will talk more about that later. When it comes to Josh, I'm honestly a little bit worried. I mean, he said in the interview that there were some friction with the band, but I don't think it was enough friction for him to actually want to quit the band. You know, when you're working with other people in large projects, it makes sense that there are some challenges. I think that's just natural. And it didn't seem like these challenges that he described was so large that he would want to quit the band. And I mean, he even got the question itself if he could quit the band, and he quite clearly said that he wouldn't, and it was just like 3 years ago. So I'm a little bit worried about that. And when it comes to the band, I mean, they has grown and adapted with Josh, and you know, Red Hot Chili Peppers is a band which really builds on the dynamic of all the band members together. So when the guitarist is replaced, it changes the whole dynamic of the band, and it took many years for them to really build that dynamic again. So it's kind of weird that they would just part with Josh and bring John back immediately again, because I mean, are they even on the same page anymore, John and the rest of the band? And how long will it take for them to really be on the same page again and start creating like they did before? But you could also argue that they have worked so much with John that they will find their places quite quickly again, and John's new experience will only make the band more alive again. It could be like that as well. It's hard to tell. I mean, it's not like John is a completely new band member. So yeah, it's really hard to tell if it makes sense or not from that aspect. And another aspect, of course, is the business aspect, and hopefully that is not too large of a thing, but you can't ignore that John rejoining the band again is really good from a business perspective. And I mean, when Josh has said what he said about the producers and things like that, I hope that that is not the main reason or a large reason at all. But we need to keep that in mind. And another thing that doesn't make sense is that from an interview in October last year, Kiedis said that they would release an album in 2019.
So this year, so let's talk about 2019 for a minute. So obviously you got you're writing a new record. Hopefully it'll come out sometime next year.
We actually start on Monday.
Okay.
Officially.
So it'll almost definitely come out next year, I think. Or good
yes.
chance.
Yeah. Next year. I mean, correct.
And obviously that has not happened, so that makes it seem like this wasn't too planned, like something weird happened. Yeah, overall, quite strange. So now when we have gone through everything that has happened, what can we really expect? Like, what do we do from here? Except for just impatiently waiting for something to happen. Well, my expectations is that we can't really have any expectations at all. All I can say is that I'm just really curious what will happen. That's really all I can say. And if you think about the past, the transition between BSSM and Californication was quite a large shift in style, and I think we will get a greater shift in style this time. I mean, will he even play guitar at this point? Who knows? I mean, considering what he said in the interview, that he's working on electronic stuff that can't be talked about. Like, what does that mean? But also, I mean, when he is within the band, he works with a lot of producers and managers and things like that, and they won't really allow him to experiment too much, I would think, at least. So that's, from that perspective, I think it's quite likely that he will mainly play guitar, but you know, the old format. But I mean, who knows? The only thing we can take for granted at this time is that John in 2020 will appear live with a band. I mean, that is really insane, you know, for someone like me who has never had the opportunity to see John live. You know, I discovered him in 2011. That is like insane. So, and now I just want to end by saying that if you like this video, please like and subscribe and comment what you think, because that is greatly appreciated. And yeah, bye.